Depends, I suppose. Depends on how much you care about what you're advocating for and how personal it is. I think
Hmm.
not to discount what you said, but I do feel like there's a different sense of urgency when you are sort of paid to be an advocate than there is when you might be getting paid, but when you are advocating for something that impacts your own neighborhood, right? I mean, I think there's a distinction between an EJ lobbyists who are, they're sort of, I'm going to overly generalize, but in many cases, a lot of the folks that I talk to who are environmental justice advocates, it's because they are from neighborhoods that are frontline communities or disadvantaged communities, or somehow, they have a personal connection there. I mean, I might live there now, right? And so that's different than an oil lobbyist who is one of a team of 30 and lives in a fancy house and is paid to sort of advocate for something that they may even believe in it, right? But it's just a different vibe, and I think it's a much harder sort of emotional tax on the EJ lobbyists. So as staff, I try to be somewhat deferential to that and have some awareness of that, and give a little more grace to the EJ lobbyists. The oil lobbyists, they better show up on their A game, and they better not show up with any bullshit because they're paid too
Right.
much money to show up with nonsense. And so,
I got it. Yeah, I think when I said it sounds difficult, is I'm just thinking of my own emotions, right? And that y- y- having to maintain, it took me time, it took many years to be able to maintain an even keeled perspective in the face of a regular barrage of no's that you get from
yeah,
people, and you know and some things that happen that just aren't great along the way, and
yeah,
that are just actually part of they're folded into the political process, right? You're going to have conflict, you're going to have drama.
yep,
I can handle it now in a way that I can actually just let things slide right off. It's like, oh, somebody said something unkind, oh well, and then
yeah.
then you go on your way. But I didn't have that nonchalance in the beginning. um I don't know, maybe just because it's easier to talk to trees. you know they don't talk back to you, right?
It just it takes learning too. It's hard to speak into this sort of machine that is, it's opaque, it's impenetrable, it's intimidating. You don't, half the time you don't know who you're actually talking to, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's daunting. So to just be like cool in the face of that is no small feat.
No, 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 I mean, now my perspective is it's bigger, right? That every person I get to talk to about a national park is a person that I could potentially enlighten them about how wonderful they are and how popular they are, and whether or not the meeting goes anywhere. You never know whether it's going to go anywhere
Yeah,
with anyone. And
yeah,
so knowing that, I used to leave offices and be like, oh, I could have done better. Why did I say that? And I'd kind of at the end of the day, like, beat myself up for not having been perfect, right? When they have completely forgotten about you and they talked to 30 people today, right? I did not have that perspective to just, it's okay. Tomorrow's another day. Start again. You don't know. Um, Again, I think that, but that's if you really care about something, you're going to have to take on that attitude of just, I'm doing the best I can. I get to work on things I care about. Yay. Right.
yep.
Um, and then the rest of it seems less frustrating. Uh, but I like that the thought that you were starting a discussion about not going through government and going through all these other different venues that are available to you to make a difference. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what those venues are and why they matter, and they can affect the legislature,
Mm.
but just not directly by knocking on a door.
So, I mean, the other venues are, I mean, kind of cliche, I guess, if you will, but all politics are local. That's something you might have heard, but um, it is true that some of the most impactful decisions on people's lives are made by school boards and you know local city councils and right and local commissions and JPAs and what are joint power authorities like or like boards of a public electric utility, right? Or there's all kinds of things that I think people just don't know about. And why would they? They're not in the news, right? They're not like it just doesn't register for people that you could go down to City Hall and like probably talk to the mayor if you wanted to. I mean, maybe not in like San Francisco or Los Angeles because they're so busy, but for the most part, those local people are super accessible. And those people roll up to the state, the elected officials. Like we have three cities in our district, and Irvine and Costa Mesa, and the mayors and the leaders of those cities, the local electeds, they can call my boss, and my boss looks to them for their opinions and their insight and takes their meetings and all that stuff. And then the same thing happens at the federal level, right? We have two senators, and we have in California we have two senators and a whole bunch of Congress people, and they look to their locals and they look to their state, representatives for their sense of what they care about. And so I think, it all kind of rolls up, and I think people have forgotten that, and it seems like the federal government is so big and so disconnected, and in many ways it is disconnected right now, but it sure does feel connected to half the country. And but that all starts at the local level. So I think involved, and what getting involved means for a first step is just go to a meeting. Just go sit in the audience. You don't have to know what to say. Right? You don't know anything about how it works to just go sit there and listen to it. And you can, for some people, it's fascinating and it's exciting, and you suddenly have this revelation that you can actually impact it. And for other people, they're like, and they go do something else, right?
Yeah, yeah. Those meetings, I think, are you trying to torture people with that advice? Like a city council meeting is not very interesting
But that's
usually.
how you see the people, you see who's involved, and then you go to their office, go complain about something, or go tell them you like something that they did. There's a novelty. Go tell some bureaucrat they did something right for once. That's a good way to get a meeting, right? That
Right.
I mean, and like just so that there's that. There's all kinds of nonprofits, and for every single possible combination of positions on every single possible issue, there's a nonprofit advocating for it, right? There are 70,000 nonprofits in California. Every opinion of every type is represented, and so if you find that, that's a way that you can get involved there. And those nonprofits oftentimes have lobbyists. There's I think it's not so much a secret, but it is for many people a little bit of a surprise when they learn that everybody has lobbyists, right? Not just big companies, but
Yeah.
everybody. Everything from Sierra Club to Planned Parenthood to the tiny little and EJ groups. Local governments have lobbyists. School districts have lobbyists. It's because lobbyists it's a dirty word, but lobbyists really are just the translators. Think of it like an attorney. Like you wouldn't just go marching into court and expect to know the language and know the process and be able to like win a case. So you hire someone who can take your complaint and translate it in a way that matters in that universe of the court. And so
Yeah.
find groups that have lobbyists, and that's how you can get involved. You don't have to do it yourself, right? You were doing it the hard way because you were your own advocate,
Everything.
lobbyist, expert, right? All of it. And like
Yeah.
that is really, really hard because you're learning so many different things all at the same time. Um,
Yes.
it's a monument. It's a testament, a monument, if you will, to your capacity to like
Yeah.
stick to
I mean,
something. But I guess
honestly,
yeah,
in some ways it was good that I thought that I was running, I was running a race that was a lot shorter,
because you
right?
never would have started.
Well, I don't know that I wouldn't have started. I just
Yeah,
think I just didn't understand the magnitude of the learning that was going to be required, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so, and in some ways that helps you because people realize you don't understand and they'll help you, right?
yep,
So
yep,
you're not locked into a position yet, and so people will then lean in and help you move the ball a little bit further forward.
yeah.
But then
That's the
there's
flexibility I'm talking about. Yeah.
yeah, but it was unintentional. I was not trying to be flexible. I I hadn't decided yet, what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And then things got more solid the more information I got, and that's how it went. But
Mhm.
it was still, I mean, that's some of the questions that I had for you that in particular in regards to environmental advocates that there's some surprises, right? And one of them was that I didn't realize that I was competing with other nonprofits because, in
Mhm.
my view, I was like, why would anyone compete with me? I mean, there's no budgets, there's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't see how there's anything to compete for, right? I don't have any line. I don't have relationships with politicians. I really didn't know anyone in the community, and I certainly, didn't have relationships with people with money and influence. It was just straight up grassroots from the beginning, like, and all the way through. But in any case, can you explain the competition that occurs between environmental groups in order for an advocate to not be surprised by what may happen?
I mean, I can give you my perspective on it.
Yes.
This isn't something I've like studied in school, so I'm not scholarly on this, but I think at a high level, the reason you have the sort of enviro violence, as I say it in a very tongue-in-cheek sort of way, in California in particular, is it's a function of it's a natural sort of outcropping of scarcity. It's not about the environmentalists being bad people, and quite frankly, it's not even about them necessarily even disagreeing. Sometimes, in fact, agreement is one of the problems they might have. So, I think in California we have one party rule, quite frankly, and we have an overabundance of Democrats and liberals. So what you end up with are factions inside of that liberal umbrella that are competing for resources. And the resources could be money, resources could be attention, resources could be time, resources could be, differentiation, right, of some way. But so I think that's where some of that fighting sources from.
Yeah.
All just about every environmental group is they're almost always nonprofits. They're grant funded. Some of them are extremely well resourced. There are environmental groups that have, not exaggerating, multiple billions of dollars in the bank that they are just sitting on, waiting for what I don't know, but right. And then there are groups that are extremely under resourced, but in many cases they're fighting for the same donors and the same dollars, and so they have to come up with a way to differentiate themselves. And oftentimes that puts them in a position where they might agree on a policy, but they have to somehow take a more extreme or slightly nuanced or funky take on it, right? And sometimes that means they have to kind of poo-poo someone else's position and to show themselves as the righteous recipient of of whatever that that grant funders goals and missions are. Um, I think it's also it's not as sexy of a selling point to say I strongly agree with everybody else that has the same position, right? Like why give me any money versus someone else, or why give me any time or attention, or why join my group over that? Like, so there is this tendency to want to be unique, and that creates, even if it's artificial, it creates some friction. I mean, I've talked to very high level folks at some very prominent nonprofits, environmental groups, advocacy groups, and they talk to us differently than they speak in their marketing or to their members or to people outside, and that's because they're they're kind of forced to be pragmatic and cooperative inside the legislature, because we actually have to solve problems in a way that works for the most part, right? I mean, we don't have to in many cases. Sometimes we pass things that are nonsense, but for the most part, like, we actually have to sift through all of the positioning and the fake sort of advocacy and the extreme polarization and all that
Mm.
stuff that is serving different functions than the development of like a sound policy that actually serves Californians. And so the policy facing representatives of the advocates, whether that be contract lobbyists or in-house lobbyists or others, will have a much more pragmatic perspective. And so I tend to ignore a lot of the marketing and
Okay.
external positioning that happens from a lot of these groups. And when they bring it into the legislature, it's sort of an eye roll, or I'll just tell them in a meeting, like, this is
Yeah.
nonsense. Like, I need you to bring me something real and something like that actually could be implemented and function. Otherwise, thanks for the meeting, but I'm less inclined to take future meetings. Like, if you want to be belligerent, you can go do that, but just do it somewhere else.
So
So
can you give an
yeah,
example of that? Like, i- if somebody came in and said, "I want to ban all pesticides in California," right?
yeah.
Um, that's a proposal that would be very hard to implement.
I mean, unless you don't want to have food, right?
Okay.
Like, yeah. I mean, yes, that's right. And I think what you'll yes that I mean, I'm reluctant to give specific examples because I don't really want to name names, but
Sure.
I just there are ideas that are brought in to the legislature that are not actually policies. Their opinions or their feelings or their right or their ideas that are not rooted in the reality of what's going on under the surface. I mean, there's a lot of I think in energy policy, it's so complicated that these sort of high level concepts, like take return on equity for a utility company, for example, right? This is how much profit a utility company makes. There are ideas that advocates bring that are things like, well, let's just put a cap on how much utility companies can make, or let's make it so the utility company can never raise its rates past, faster than uh, the rate of inflation or the cost of living index, consumer price index, right? Like, these are
Hmm.
things that generate donations, and people feel these ideas very deeply, and they make logical sense until you understand that the return on equity is set largely by ratings agencies and global markets. And we need investors to keep investing in California to generate enough money to build our electric grid and build all of our electricity generation resources. And we start putting caps and things, and what you do is you create a hostile regulatory environment, which actually drives investment away, which means now you have to raise how much money we're willing to pay investors to lend us money, lend our utility companies money. So the cap actually had the opposite effect and led to a more expensive cost of debt and cost of equity, right? And so I think there are 1,000 examples like that where the sort of populist rhetoric and the populist idea is exactly the opposite thing that you should do, right? Rent control. I mean, yeah, it's terrible that people can't afford rent. Rent control is documented in study after study to reduce housing inventory. Reduce housing inventory makes housing more expensive. So you're right. I mean, so there's just there's just things like that that I say it, I sound like a Republican, but they're not always wrong. Some of this stuff is actually rooted in
Yep.
science, but it gets sucked into the advocacy realm, and it gets churned, into the churn machine and the rage machine, and so
Right.
I think a lot of environmental groups get sucked into that stuff, and some of that is by necessity, and it's unfortunate, and some of that is just being
Yeah.
opportunistic, or just how do you get attention right now?
Yeah. I mean, if you want attention, right? I think it's easier to get things done quietly, but
Not
at
gonna
some point,
lie, not gonna deny that.
no, I really, I think
Yeah,
that's your best, if you're really wanting to move something and you have a well-formed idea, the quieter that you can be, the better. I mean, just get everything done at the library if you can, silence. But at some point somebody might find out about your idea, and then you might discover
yeah,
that you get some pushback. So you have to be
yeah,
prepared for that. But ultimately,
yeah,
I think what brought that forward was just the fact that sometimes people do want attention from the press. That could be because it's helpful to their nonprofit and raising money. It could be that they just have a large ego and they want to have attention. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that people want some press, and actually catchy slogans on the internet catch fire, and then things kind of burgeon and they keep going. But um, that doesn't guarantee, and it's sometimes often opposed to an actually really well thought out idea that makes sense, right? So I mean, I think the situation with what happened with the Senate candidate that has now bowed out of the race in Maine, where I read the New York Times article on the cascade of things that were happening behind the scenes that people were kind of sweeping away, right? Like, oh, well, it's not a problem until it is a problem, right? But he was really good and marketable on social media, and, there's a person that is making sales, right? That's not the same as having a sound background, sound policies. You don't really want to be too interesting. I mean, you want to have a good idea, but ultimately to get something done, I mean, make a small change. But again, I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm the person that advocated for a 1.4 million acre national monument. Um, but it didn't
maybe
start
nobody would have noticed.
it didn't start out with that. That's the irony, is that it
Yeah,
started out with that one sentence, and then as I went along, people would ask me about the boundaries, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, maybe the northern half, and then I would meet with George Whitmore, who was one of the first to climb El Capitan, so he was into big ideas, and he's like, well, what's wrong with the southern half? And I was like, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Anyway, so it developed in time.
yeah,
But
yeah,
in terms of trying to get things done, the point is, I think that you want to be reasonable, and
yeah,
maybe marketing is not as reasonable as actually what a person who is an experienced lobbyist is going to sit down and say, okay, here's what we have. We think this is a reasonable
yeah.
policy change, and then they can move forward with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, everything's on the spectrum, right? It's attention and all that stuff is important when you need some noise.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need some noise to move things forward. I think where it starts to break down is when you are building noise around very complicated policies, and people uh, you know want to oversimplify it, because in many cases what helps you build that coalition is simplicity of messaging and purpose. And
Yeah.
oftentimes the complications make things less, uh, I don't know what the
Right.
words are. Make it less enticing for sort of rallying, less, less able to roll up into a simple singular type of message. So
Right.
um,
That's
then
right.
there is stuff that is just, it's quiet because it's something that needs to happen, but the policy itself just feels kind of gross. But it the outcomes are going to be good, but the message is really funky. So it's just right. I mean, and yeah. So I just think that there's a whole, every possible permutation of this you could imagine exists in in the process of making legislation. So
Right. Yeah, that's right. And I think, and I've been having a lot of conversations with a wide variety of people across the country in relation to national parks. And I mean, every state is different, has different dynamics, and if you're presenting like, here's the top 10 things you need to do for making your national park happen, for that state, the top three might be completely different depending on the
mhm.
environment. And I
Yep,
mean,
yep,
so, right. I mean, it's all, I think being flexible and having a good sense of humor, if you can, is the
sure,
best
absolutely.
way to proceed, right? And then
Yeah,
I would add to just have some activities that are in your life that are not related to the political thing that you're working on. Um, whatever it is, gardening, or maybe you're painting a house or something that is that you have control over, that you don't actually have to have a committee meeting over. It's just
yeah,
you can plant that tree yourself. So
yeah.
um so
So you mentioned you triggered something for me, and I don't want to cut you off from your next
yeah, go ahead.
question, so hold that thought. But you mentioned Graham Platner, and I think there's a through line between him and successful advocacy, right? I mean, what he was doing was advocating for himself as being right, and I think what the takeaway from him is, for an advocate and people like him, there are others, Trump, right, for example, where their shortcomings are actually so glaringly obvious and kind of egregious, and yet they keep winning people. Um, it's the it's the feeling of authenticity, and probably is actually authenticity. Um, I think people don't think of Trump as being authentic, but Trump is authentic.
Yeah.
Uh, Plattner was authentic. There, and that's what people are drawn to. No one expects an advocate to come in and sort of be like the ultimate truth teller, right? I don't
Yeah.
expect any lobbyist or advocate to tell me the truth. I expect them to tell me their version of the truth through the lens of what they're advocating for. Um, and if if they if they lie to me in a way that they're saying something that is just like, it is factually the opposite, and I know that they're lying about it, right? That's actually more rare than you might think.
Hmm.
But I think people feel like they have to either like kind of hide or their perspective to be a good advocate, or like, when I say flexible, I don't mean that you have to like pick this weird neutral vanilla middle ground and like own that space. Like, we know you're advocating for something, but I just think that there's a like, it's okay to be, it's okay to advocate, but just don't cross over to where you're hiding the truth, or because that authenticity kind of turns off, and it's hard to describe it exactly, but you can kind of feel it when it happens, and so that authenticity wins, and it will wash away so many sins and so many defects in the underlying campaign if it's just, there's a truthfulness to it.
That is an important statement that explains. the good and the bad, essentially. And the
Hmm.
good being that, if you come into an office and you're authentic, that's going to be very powerful. Uh, and I know that to be true from my experience with everyone along the campaign trail, for the monument, is that if you're speaking from your heart, people respond with their heart. I mean, in person. Online, it's a different thing.
Hmm.
But I was really pleasantly surprised by that, actually. Um, but on the other side of this is we're looking at someone like Trump, who's authentic. I actually agree with you. I think he's being himself all the time, right?
Yes. Yep.
But he's not really advocating for the people of this country. He's advocating for himself. And
Correct.
and so that's not great. And I think, if we are being kind to his followers, we would say that they are loving his authenticity and not really understanding what's happening on the other side of it, right? Uh, so yeah, I'm not sure what the lesson is from there, other than I think one, be authentic when you're doing your lobbying, but two, be um, watchful of a person's actions and not just what they're saying, right?
I mean,
Because that's
yeah. For me, the takeaway with Trump has always been propaganda is a hell of a drug, right?
so said Jacob Moss. Yeah,
I mean, it just is. It's the result of a propaganda machine that we haven't really had in this country before, and that he and those around him who are trying to get things have they kind of Forrest Gump their way into this. They got lucky at this moment in time, this rise of this type of media and this media transition that we're in, and the technology that allows for the spread of media and the way that it spreads.
yeah,
It just coincided with a super charismatic, shameless, narcissistic, antisocial personality disorder, dark triad, guy who's happened to be famous for some crazy television reality show. Like there are just so many things that had to align in this moment. But I really think most of the credit goes to the way that our media is transitioning in this country, and what an amazing propaganda tool
yeah,
it is.
right. And there's no guardrails for that media, right? The
Not yet.
algorithm, it doesn't care about truth. So um,
No, not really. And that this is a whole nother like series. This is another multi-season podcast, but yeah, it doesn't care about truth. It cares about rage, cares about
yes,
eyeballs, cares about triggering feelings that horrifies people. Yeah.
yes. And I don't know how to solve that. Okay, so we were running out of time,
Okay.
but do you have any final words, advice for people who want to make a difference, um, and are, I mean, it can be inside the state government or outside the state government. And I think, questions like that are hard to answer, but um, I don't know.
Um, I think so. When you ask for this, I mean, I almost feel silly giving advice, even though I've been pontificating for a couple hours now. But um, this is advice for advocates. Is that who you're sort of pointing this at?
Well, yes. Ultimately, we're we will be working with a lot of grassroots advocates that are hoping to make national parks. And, that's a long battle. You've got maybe decades of time that you're going to be working on something.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you don't actually get to work outside of the federal government if you want to make a national park.
Yeah.
So for them, what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah. Everything is the long game. Your reputation matters, and so I think treat every interaction as though you're sort of building a foundation of a longer term relationship, and your reputation, and losing or being wrong or those sorts of things. Those aren't hits to your reputation. I think what the hits to your reputation is how you take losing, and how you respond to being wrong. And so I think, there's a lot of there are a lot of times that some of the best advocates that I work with will come in and they'll be like, "Hey, this thing changed. I don't want your boss to like get caught with this thing blowing up in her face," or, "Hey, this new piece of information, I didn't know about it," or, "My client was hiding the ball on it, and I just wanted to make sure you're aware of this so you can, adjust and make decisions." And I think at times it is important for the advocate to protect their personal and professional relationship even above the campaign that they're working on. And that's a fine line because you have a client that you have to answer to. But think of yourself as being in a space with the same people forever. There is only one capital,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
think that if you think that lying is a strategy, know that that will not work. You will burn yourself out and you'll be known as the liar.
Yeah.
And so, I think that, and all this again, I was on a gradient. The more powerful your clients are, the more you can be a scumbag. But the second you lose that client, people will bury you for sport, right? Like, so but I just think that that's probably the biggest thing I could say for the advocate. And it sounds self-serving, but I think if you want to be successful for who your clients are or your campaign or whatever you're advocating for, you have to be able to have you have to be trusted. You have to be trusted. You have to be a resource. If I get involved with a group sponsoring a bill, and I don't know, the Fed, I think the sponsor is the elected, but in California, the sponsor is sort of the outside group that's the lead advocate on a bill. If I'm going to enter into an agreement with you to work on something for the year, I have to trust that you're going to tell me everything, the bad and the good, the stuff that I don't know about, the stuff that's coming, that's around the corner that you know about that I don't see, because I'm not going to walk my boss into a blind alley. And not just because it blows back on me, but because, that it's not a way to be successful. So,
Yeah.
because it's not, it's a team thing, right? So you as an advocate might come across some like bad news that you think is like the worst thing. You're like, oh my God, everything is, it's all come down. This is it. This is the end. And you
Yeah.
walk in and you say like, "I'm sorry, but this campaign is dead. Like this thing happened." And your staffer's like, "What? No, I'll call Jill and be like, 'Hey Jill,' and it's solved." Right. Or the member knows somebody, or you just don't know. Nobody has the whole picture. Nobody knows everybody. Nobody knows
Yeah.
everything. And so I think just that willingness to be vulnerable and share what you know, and be obvious about what you don't know.